Thank you for joining our Pick of the List session. I'm going to be introducing the first author today, and I'm going to try not to stumble over your last name. It's Cozbi Cabrera, is the author and illustrator of several acclaimed children's picture books. Me and Mama is her latest book that beautifully captures a relationship between a mother and a daughter. Please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'd love to share my screen because I want to share a little bit of my motivation and my inspiration for writing Me and Mama. So here we go. Me and Mama, an ode to the everyday. The everyday, a string of moments from good morning to you, good morning to you, to good night. It started with a cup, my favorite cup of all time, and my 3-year-old was trying to get me a glass of water, unsolicited. That precise moment that I recognized that joy sits squarely on the shoulders of equanimity. Early on, I saw it as a simple book with very sparse language. We would trace this tenderness between mother and daughter through their everyday objects, in the same way an anthropologist might surmise a number of things about a people by rummaging through their objects and everything of theirs that was tethered to utility. I would show very little of this mother and daughter, few suggestions, half hints, maybe a spread or two. But for the most part, the challenge was to let the story in and allow the reader to fill in the gaps and bring shape to the text. After revising, the question of to show or not to show became, where will this go? And it was now about the string of moments where time is irrelevant and the soul is being nourished, watered, and fed. It's that adage about the days are long and the years are short.
And there's time to play.
And when we have no idea what we're doing, and we're allowed the space to do some things imperfectly.
Until we get it. When it's raining, we find the fun.
And something like getting into the shower, a potential friction point, reminds us of that rain. And we get to compare and contrast because that's how we sort and connect our dots. Observe and say or think this to that.
Not this, but that.
And the dark, the thing we fear and from which we hide,
is waiting for us.
So we can get to the rich stuff, those places we get to process and replay, and even conjure up reminders of who we love and who loves us and how we share those string of moments from good morning to
good night.
Hi there, thanks for being with me here. And then I want to show a little bit of the art, so I'll go back in and I'll share a little bit. Okay, hopefully everybody can see okay. So what I'm showing are just a bunch of these little items, and kids are so amazing because in their powers of observing and in their acquisition for language, you know, they're just running around naming things, oftentimes inventing their own names for things. And so I wanted them to continue to be inspired to do that and to look at the many different items around them in their everyday environment and sort of be able to compare and to contrast. So this is our opening scene where the mom does sing good morning. And then this notion of waking up in the morning and having kind of, even with some flexibility, a set ritual, you know, to look outside, to see what's going on and how it relates to how we plan our day. And yeah, this is our cup. Our boots. And of course, our puppy's tail is always the last thing to head out the door. But our little protagonist knows to be careful. And the outdoors and our relationship to the outdoors. I'm going to read from this portion of it. It's just them outside taking their walk, and it says, "We sing out loud to sky. Sky is taller, taller than the trees. Mama says a song is highs and lows." Splash, shadow play, and being tucked in. And so this notion of like being read to at night, or just the bedtime ritual, is just such an amazing way, especially now during this time when things seem a little upset in the world, that children have these sequence of events, you know, that gives them a sense of control so that they can anticipate, you know, and then in turn sort of find their own rhythm in that sequence. Goodnight kiss. The dark, she turns off the light. Peekaboo. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's absolutely gorgeous. All right. So up next, we have Eric Gansworth, award-winning author. Eric Gansworth has written an astonishingly beautiful memoir in verse, Apple, Skin to the Core, and I believe it is on sale today. Happy book birthday.
All right, there it is. Hello, thank you for having me to this really lovely panel of writers. So yeah, my book, Apple, Skin to the Core, is a memoir. I sort of thought I was never ever going to write a memoir, and I think that's usually what happens when I'm about to approach a new work, is to look at what I've been avoiding most recently. And so that's kind of where this went forward, was to try to imagine how I might organize such a thing, because I feel like I'm not necessarily all that interesting a person in general, and but I am from a very unusual community. It's about 1,000 people, a reservation in upstate New York, so everybody knows everybody. So it means sort of like you have 300 extra parents watching you at all times, which can be very helpful and also very not a lot of fun at the same time when you're a young person. But it also meant trying to grasp how to represent that. And I think I've largely written fiction in narrative form, because you can sort of put the veil up in fiction. And yet the entire time, my books of poems tended to be very intimate and much more autobiographical. And I wanted to shape for that work. And because I'm very interested in the way pop culture meshes with indigenous life, I was sort of looking at those things. So for a lot of people, Apple is, is this thing. But I'm from kind of like a different era of pop culture, and so Apple was the record label that the Beatles created. And any of you who's familiar with my work, you'll see that my last two books are kind of very Beatles centric, and so it was like working through that idea. The reality is that Apple is also a slur in reservation communities. And I know in other diverse communities, there are similar slurs. So Apple is red on the outside and white on the inside. And I got to thinking about what that means. Where does that come from? And finally, I arrived at the reality that community members are threatened by the idea of you as a fellow community member not fully embracing who you are. And so the idea of representing a much more white attitude or a white persona um, goes back ultimately generations, and to what happened to my grandparents. Three of my four grandparents um, were forced to go to boarding schools, government boarding schools, which there hasn't been a lot written about for younger people. I mean, I've seen a few things, but not too many. And the idea behind the boarding schools was to kill the Indian but save the man. It was to wipe out indigenous identity and to keep children there long enough that if they tried to go back to their home communities, they wouldn't be able to. They would no longer have a connection to the culture. But I was lucky that my three grandparents who had this experience as children chose to come back and to try to kind of reintegrate. And they had siblings who did not or could not, who just really never ever came back. And I also noticed that the the ideas and the kind of attitudes behind that fear were certainly true in my parents and their generation. Like their parents had instilled in them the fear of sounding too Indian. And so my siblings and I, we have kind of a weird accent. It's like totally invented. It's not very much a res accent. And it's also not really like a Western New York accent where I'm from. And I think my mom probably like pulled it off of TV in the early days of TV. So it's kind of like the strange Midwestern uh, like personality voice. And so the work is very much kind of exploring what that meant to be a grandchild of boarding school survivors, and then all the ways that we re-pieced it together, you know, because we stayed in our community and continued to live and flourish there. I am the youngest of seven siblings. My family really likes to procreate, so my immediate family is somewhere around 65 people, I think, right now. That's just like my siblings on down. My extended family is around 330, I believe, at the moment. So it's a big, big family. And so to try and wrestle with that and also wrestle with what it means to write a story of an individual when really it's the individual inside of this larger group was what I was kind of trying to grasp in this work. And so because I wanted to really explore that idea in these kind of snapshot approaches, you know, in that's I guess the luxury of a memoir in poems is you can be very selective in these individual ways. Was that I thought about my family's photos, and like this kind of key moment in our lives, in that this house that we grew up in a freak accident, was hit by a car, hit right at the propane tanks that we use for heat, and it exploded most of the house, and it burned the rest of it in a half an hour. This is when I was in my 20s. And so out of all of our family photos, we were able to salvage maybe about 60, but a lot of them were damaged. And so in some ways, this memoir is created around the idea of the stories we tell when we look at our photos. And so what survives of those family photos is where I ended up drawing this from. And at the same time, organizing it around the Beatles releases once they found their freedom, once they became the owners of Apple Records. And so the book is divided up into four sections. Apple Records, Get Back, which was the original title of Let It Be, Dog Street, which is kind of the reservation nickname for the road I grew up in after Abbey Road. And as an Indigenous person, I just couldn't really have the white album at all, so it's the red album. And so it's kind of constructed around my grandparents and their years, and then my childhood, and the year I realized that if I were going to succeed as an artist, I was going to have to engage that larger white world. And then the last section is kind of the aftermath of that decision. So I hope you, if you choose to check it out, I hope you enjoy it. It probably sounds like a really depressing book. I hope it's not, because it's much more the story of of survival. And one of the ways that Indigenous communities survive most is through laughter. And so we're kind of on the sassy side. And like if it's a really horrible time, that's when you see people laughing the most. So I hope if you choose to read it, you see the thread of humor as survival through its kind of rough narrative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. It is not depressing. It is lovely and wonderful and amazing. And I highly encourage everyone to check it out. As well as this next book, I'm going to be welcoming Amy Timberlake for Skunk and Badger. Newbery Honor author Amy Timberlake has created a brilliant new novel with illustrations by John Klassen. Skunk and Badger is an absolute treasure and a really great read aloud. Take it away.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read just a little bit from the beginning. It's a read aloud, so I feel like I should read it to you a little bit. All right, chapter 1. Oh, it's about a badger who gets an unexpected roommate. There you go. Chapter 1. The first time Badger saw Skunk, he thought, puny, and shut the front door. Badger didn't normally shut the door on animals that knocked, but there was too much slick in this one stripe, too much puff in his tail. Also, there'd been that grin and the way he'd stuck out his paw as if he'd been looking forward to meeting Badger for a long, long time. Badger knew what to make of that. He shut the door before the fellow got any ideas. Not buying anything, he said through the keyhole. When knocking continued, Badger added, ever. Then he drew the bolt and the double bolt and latched the chain. Poor sight, Badger thought briskly as he padded back into his rock room. Aunt Lula's brownstone row house had not come with a rock room. Badger had made improvements. He had dragged out the sofa and the cushy chairs. He'd boxed the books and board games. He'd closed up the fireplace. Then he'd pushed in his rock table and his stool and aligned his work light. Over the fireplace, he had hung his rock hammers and saws. His rock tumbler fit on the window seat. The bookshelves had been a good place for boxes of rocks and minerals. He'd shelved them alphabetically with the most delicate specimens wrapped in tissue paper. In the fireplace, Badger had piled geodes in a pyramid. Artistic. Finally, Badger had shoved open the pocket doors, clearing a path into the kitchen for a paw full of dry cereal, and declared his rock room complete. Now, Badger pulled his stool up to his rock table. He adjusted his work light. He picked up a magnifying glass with one paw and the quartzite with the other. Rap, 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 rap. The sound came from the front door. Badger stopped. It was that fellow again. So the deal is that Badger is about to get a roommate, and he really doesn't, he has no idea that the roommate is coming. And he is, well, he thinks of himself as an important rock scientist who does important rock work, and he must focus on his rock work. And Skunk is a completely rambunctious, spontaneous, crazy, not crazy. He's actually very sane, but anyway, they're very opposite, and they have to come together in some way. So it's basically kind of like Wallace and Gromit meets Winnie the Pooh meets The Odd Couple. So just kind of that sort of thing. So, and then, okay, John Clausen did the art. Oh my gosh. Okay. So here's the book. Oops, here's the book. Now watch this. Okay, you take the dust jacket off. Woo! Then you get really excited because you can move into the brownstone. There's absolutely no words on the boards of this book. So it's like it becomes a little house. And I just have to show you some of John's art. So, okay. So here is Badger. On the front, they actually have a full color, I think it's called a frontispiece. but it's a full color piece of art of Badger at his rock table. And I'll show you a little bit more. This is Skunk in the room that he takes in Badger's brownstone basically and makes into his moon room. And in the very back, it's just a beautiful book. I mean, honestly, I'm really pleased with what Algonquin has done with this book. And John, I mean, they designed this together. And this is a Badger playing the ukulele at the very end. He's having a very bad day in this illustration. This is a moment of reflection from the depths of his soul. So anyway, so that's the story of Skunk and Badger. I really hope you check it out. It's a beautiful book. I worked really hard on it. I tried to make it really funny. I think it's about the closest I've ever come to writing something that's like a play, actually. It's a lot of dialogue. It's just snap, 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 and kind of feels like a meringue in my head. So, you know, you just have to balance it. It's kind of a cool little thing. All right, that's all I got for you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was awesome. All right, so next up will be Kelly Yang. Kelly Yang's award-winning debut novel, Front Desk, not only received stellar praise from critics, but more importantly, from kids everywhere. The beloved series continues with her latest book, 3 Keys. Take it away, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Kelly Yang. I'm the author of Front Desk. This is a book that I wrote originally to get my son, who's 8 years old, to, number one, understand how I grew up, but also read, because he was not really reading. And so it was a book that I wrote for my own kid, never thinking that it was going to resonate with so many kids around the world. And it really has changed my life. And I've toured the world, speaking to kids, understanding how much this book meant to them. A lot of kids really never saw themselves represented on the page before Front Desk. And when they read it, you know, they would tell me about, oh, you know, because of your book, my mom, you know, I finally got to tell people at school that my mom works in a restaurant, or my dad works at a grocery store, or something like that. So it was just an amazing experience. And to imagine like following up this book that was very hard and very, it was kind of intimidating. But I am here to talk about the sequel, 3 Keys. This is the follow-up to Front Desk, and it continues the story of Mia Tang. She is 11 in the story, and she's a first-generation immigrant from China, and she is managing the front desk of the motel that she and her parents and all their immigrant friends and the weeklies and the customers have bought from Mr. Yao. And she's managing it with her best friend, Lupe. And Mia's never had a best friend before because she's moved around from school to school to school, and it was really hard to make a best friend if you're constantly moving. So finally, she understands friendship. She's got a new best friend. She's thinking this is going to be the best year ever. Except it's an election year, very much based on the real election of 1994, the governor's race here in California. If you guys remember, it was Pete Wilson against Kathleen Brown. And it was a heated race, and I remember living through it. There was a new law on the ballot, Proposition 187. For those of you who, you know, might remember Prop 187 or don't remember, it was a law that was designed to kick out all undocumented immigrant kids from our schools, from our public schools, and not allow them to access healthcare. Okay, so even if they got sick, they couldn't go to the hospital. Now, I remember this law very vividly because it was something that I grew up with. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if this thing passes, what's gonna happen? You know, I might get kicked out, my friends might get kicked out. You just didn't know, because in my mind, even though my parents had papers, the difference between having those papers and then getting them taken away, it's like that, you know, it's you go to this immigration tower every year to get your papers renewed. And every year I'd remember my mom would take me, and we'd have to wake up at like the crack of dawn, because there was this long line of people outside, and it was always cold and you were shivering, finally getting inside. And, you know, just depending on what the guy felt like that day, he could decide to deny you. And that would be it, that you'd be undocumented. Boom, it could just happen like that. So in my mind, it didn't really matter that this law was aimed at undocumented children. In my mind, it was aimed at all immigrants, which really honestly it was. And there were these acts of hate crime that you would see. I mean, it's documented in the book, but it was documented in real life too. Everything that happens in this book actually happened in California. And it's going to take all of Mia's bravery and her resilience and her voice to stand up for what's right. And when she learns that Lupe, her best friend, is undocumented, Mia has to learn to be an ally. And the girls work really hard to change voters' minds and save Lupe's dad, Jose, who gets picked up by the police and put in immigration jail, awaiting deportation proceedings. So I remember growing up with all this, and I was only like, I think I was 10 at the time, just watching all this racism around me, and it was just like blowing up everywhere, you know, like it was on TV, there were these ads all the time, and being in the classroom, and the other kids would openly speculate about us. You know, they would speculate about our immigration status, like she's legal, he's illegal, whatever. They would say these words, and they were so hurtful to anybody who didn't look white. And a boy in my hometown of Anaheim actually died, and he was only 2 years older than me. He died because he was undocumented. The law passed. Okay, that's something that is like unbelievable that this law passed here in California, but it did. It passed 60 to 40. That's how many people wanted to deny immigrants the right to go to the hospital and to go to school. But he died because he was undocumented, and he got sick right after this law passed, and he was not sure whether he should go to the hospital or not. His parents waited and waited and waited, and then he passed away. And that happened in my hometown. It was like 2 blocks away. So I always remembered the impact of this election and the anger, this explosive rage. And I carried those memories with me for a really long time, you know, and I told myself, you know, this is not going to happen again. This is not going to happen again. We learned our lesson. The law was, you know, defeated in the courts. Like they said it was unconstitutional. So it's going to be okay. But then I get to college and I'm taking a class with the campaign manager of Pete Wilson. And he was one of the guys who sort of shaped this law. He was one of the people behind this law. And I just remembered his voice from television as a kid. And here was this guy who was the architect of this whole experience that had like scarred me as a child. And in that class, he kind of took all of us behind some of the strategy and like why they did it. It was like a really smart, strategic thing to do to win the election. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, you know, we're not pawns to win an election. Like this is like my life, you know, this is real. And how could you like design this whole campaign to make me feel this way, you know, to you know, put the fear in me of losing everything and everyone in my community. So I really needed to write this book. It's a really timely, emotional, and important story. It explains racism, where it comes from historically, and what we can all do to stop it, even at a really young age. It empowers kids to speak up, to stand up to racism. We don't have to take this. We can learn to be an ally. We can bond together and come together united. That's what's going to get us through this current crisis. And we have to learn about the 3 keys of friendship, which in my opinion are also the 3 keys of allyship. They are, you got to listen, you got to care, and you got to keep trying. And most importantly, this is a really fun book to read. It is a fast-paced book. It's a page turner. It's really suspenseful. There's a lot at stake, and it's exciting. It galvanizes kids to understand elections and feel really energized from a young age to make a difference. It's a sequel that I think truly lives up to the first book, and was really hard. It took me many, many drafts to do. But again, I've seen the impact of Front Desk, and I've seen how many kids really need this story, need this series, and I'm really proud to give them 3 keys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, round of applause. Thank you for sharing. I like want to like get up and do something now. But we can't yet, because last and certainly not least, we have Charlie Jane Anders. Charlie Jane Anders is best known for her journalism and award-winning adult fiction. She brings her incredible talent to a YA novel called Victories Greater Than Death that will be published April 2021. And thank goodness it is going to be a series. Take it away.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I turned the cover of my novel, Victories Greater Than Death, into my Zoom background because I don't even have a copy of it yet. It's so new. We just did the cover reveal on Friday. I just want to say I'm so thrilled to be here with you all. I miss hanging out with booksellers. I miss going to bookstores. I mean, I've been going to bookstores a little bit recently, but I love bookstores so much. I love independent bookstores. Calvin and I were chatting a little bit before in the green room about, Maggie Tokuda Hall, who you heard from earlier. She and I helped to organize the bookstore and chocolate crawl, where we would lead people around to bookstores and get them to buy as many books as possible and eat chocolate along the way. And then more recently, this past spring and summer, we did the We Love Bookstores fundraisers and raised, I think, about $62,000 for local independent bookstores here in the Bay Area. I love independent bookstores, and I'm just so grateful that you're all still here and just so grateful for everything you do. So basically, at the start of Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, where Peter Quill, this little kid, gets just like pulled up into a spaceship and finds out that he's actually part alien and gets taken away from Earth forever, pretty much. That was what I wanted more than anything when I was a little kid. Like, I just wanted a spaceship to come down, take me away from this planet, and just take me away forever. Like, especially as a teenager, I was like, just get me off this planet now, please, come on. Where are you, aliens? And like, especially to find out that I was really an alien or part alien, that was all I wanted. I just wanted to get away. I just wanted to go off on a huge, epic, massive, awesome adventure with weird creatures and, starships and just like flying through the universe. And that was all I wanted. And so, I decided to kind of write a book about that. And that's really the origin story of my novel, Victories Greater Than Death. It's about a teenage girl who has found out that she actually was, is an alien. She was left on this planet as a baby, like disguised as a human. And as soon as she's old enough, which basically when she turns 16, she's old enough, aliens are going to come and take her away, and she's going to fulfill her heroic destiny and become the hero that she was always meant to be. And that's something that just speaks powerfully to all the longings that I had as a kid. And to be honest, the longings that I still have days where I'm like, could I just leave this planet now? Please, can I just go to a different planet for like a while? I don't know. So, the thing about being taken away and leaving home and going off the planet, leaving Earth, going off on a heroic voyage is that you kind of bring your baggage with you. You can't leave, you bring yourself with you. You can't leave behind all of your stuff about who you are and what you're struggling with as a person and your identity and everything that you were dealing with back on Earth. That's all going to come with you. And, this story really kind of came to life for me when I realized that the main character, Tina, so Tina is the girl who was left on Earth as a little kid, as a baby, and she's known for several years, like since maybe she was 11 or 12, she's known that she's not actually from this planet. She's supposed to go off and have this adventure. And that's all she's dreamed about ever since then. She's been just waiting for the day when she would get to go and become the person she was supposed to be. But she has a best friend named Rachel. And I feel like the story really started to click for me when I started to build it around the friendship between Tina and Rachel specifically, because Rachel is kind of the person who anchors Tina and connects her to her life on Earth as a human. And at first I was like, well, maybe Rachel will just be there at the start of the story and then Tina will go off on her own. But when I decided to have Rachel go into space with Tina and be there with her and kind of remind Tina of where she came from and where she grew up and all of the stuff that she did back on Earth when she was trying to be a hero on Earth, that was really when the story came to life for me in a lot of ways. And it really is a story about the friendship between these two girls. And Rachel is kind of like the opposite of Tina. I love writing stories about like opposites, I guess. And Rachel is like a shy, kind of retiring, introverted artist who kind of hides in the corner and talks to herself and doesn't really talk to anybody else. But she's kind of the emotional core of the story, and she's really the anchor that Tina keeps connecting to. And Rachel's the one who is like, we should bring some other kids from Earth. We should recruit other kids from Earth to come with us. And so, thanks to Rachel, there ends up being a whole group of kids from Earth on this ship. And we have a group of friends from Earth who are all going on this adventure together with Tina. And there's kind of like this tension between Tina wanting to be like, I'm the chosen one, I'm the hero of this story, it's all about me kind of. And Tina's not self-centered, but she's been dreaming of this heroic destiny for as long as she can remember, versus like her friendship with these kids from Earth who are all way out of their depth. They don't know what they're doing on this spaceship. They knew that they signed up for having this amazing adventure, but nothing could prepare them for what they're dealing with. And so Tina's kind of torn between these two things, this friendship with her friend from Earth and these other kids from Earth, and her heroic destiny that's all she wants to grab. And that's kind of, it kind of turns into a meditation on what it is to be a hero, and whether being a hero is just standing up and being like, it's me, I'm the savior, I'm gonna save everybody, versus like whether being a hero is working with your friends and being part of a chosen family and lifting everybody else around you up, rather than just being like it all being about you. And that's kind of what Tina's struggling with throughout the book. And the other thing that I really, as I developed this book, that I really was passionate about including was a lot of LGBTQ representation, because I was talking to teenagers and kids who were not, especially queer kids, who were not seeing themselves reflected in books. And when I was growing up, all the adventure books, all of the kind of early YA books that I was reading were about mostly straight people and straight kids. And I felt like teens were really hungry for more trans and non-binary and, pansexual and just queer and gay representation on the page. And so this book ends up having a lot of stuff about identity in terms of like who you want to be as a hero, but also in terms of, accepting queer identities. And part of what I loved about like this space world that I created, this kind of interstellar, intergalactic society, is that they respect all genders and all identities. And the way that it's set up, they have a translator that can translate any language to any other language, but you cannot use the wrong pronoun for anybody. You always use the correct pronoun. Even if you don't intend to, it will correct the pronoun for you, because that was just a thing that was really important to me. And finally, I was at a panel, I was in the audience at a panel a few years ago where it was a panel about young adult fiction. And it was a group of actual teens, which often I go to panels about young adult fiction, it's adults talking about young adult, but this was all teens talking about their relationship to young adult fiction, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. And the thing that they kept saying was they wished that young adult fiction dealt more realistically with the consequences of violence. And that was the thing that really stuck in my mind, and I'd already been thinking about that a lot. And it's not just the consequences of violence in terms of like people get hurt, obviously, and people die and there's loss, but also what does it cost to you to be inflicting violence on other people? What does it do to you to be violent? And what does that take away from you when you choose to use a gun? Like all of our space heroes are going around shooting guns and shooting people all the time, and they never stop to think about, I just killed another person. There was a person who was alive a minute ago and now they're dead because of me. And I really wanted this book to deal with that. So in the end, Victories Greater Than Death is really a book about the same thing that my adult books are about, but in a little bit of a different way. The question of identity and being true to yourself, but also just asking yourself over and over again, who am I? Who do I want to be? And what do I want to fight for? And how do I want to fight for it? And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who shared.
And we have a little extra time between this session and the next. So if anybody has Q&A or you want to tell us about the next book you're working on or whatever, that'd be great.
I think definitely I would love to know what you guys are working on now, if you can share.
Cozbi?
Yes, I just unmuted myself. So I'm painting a book about Elizabeth Jennings, who in 1865 had the audacity to ride on a streetcar that she was not permitted, got thrown off and got back on, and got thrown off again. And the young Chester Arthur Higgins tried the case in the courts and won, and he later became president of the United States. So this book is written by Amy Hill hearth, and I'm doing the illustrations for it.
Oh.
There you go, Amy.
I'm writing 3 of these, so I have 2 more to go. I've written book 2. I'm working on book 3, so.
I'll go. I'm working on, I hinted in the second book of the trilogy that Victories Greater Than Death is the first book of, and I'm waiting for edits on that, and I'm working really hard on the third book. I also have an adult book that I'm working on, which it's too soon to talk about, but I'm about halfway through writing a first draft.
I'm working on more middle grade. I can't share more details than that, but I love writing middle grade, and so I'm working on more middle grade.
My previous 2 young adult novels, as I said, were kind of Beatles oriented. The first book was a Paul McCartney book, and the second was a John and Yoko book. It was If I Ever Get Out of Here and Give Me Some Truth. And when it was clear I was doing that, some people were kind of joking, as they often do, giving Ringo the grief. They're like, "Oh, what's that Ringo novel gonna be like? Is that what's next?" So he never really gets respect, and I thought, yeah, that's gonna be the next one. So, so that's what I'm working on. An early chapter of it is out in the anthology Fresh Ink. It's called Don't Pass Me By.
There is another question coming from Summer, who asked, have any of the authors found any challenges writing during our COVID times?
I'll go first. Yes, it was basically, the spring was really hard. The spring was hard for a bunch of reasons. I lost a close family member and almost lost another close family member, but also it was hard to just focus. It was hard to write. Like, just my writing routine was turned upside down. And I was like, oh, I can just cocoon myself and just have, hide away, and I'm a hermit anyway, it'll be great. But no, I could not. It took me months before I was able to get back into it, and I'm very grateful that I have now.
I found I had tremendous trouble doing almost anything creative, and for a long period I couldn't even read, which is one of my great pleasures in life. It was really mortifying to not be able to read even fiction, writers whose work I really love. And the weirdest solace was finding A&E's Evening at the Improv, which was kind of really bad 80s improv, is back on one of the streaming services, and it was kind of terrible, and yet in some weird way comforting, because it reminded me of a significantly pre-COVID world. So I guess that was escapism in the strangest of ways. But I had not been able to productively engage in a lot of things for a significant period. Finally, recently, able to again.
Yeah, I think, it's really hard to find that peace, and I've got kids and they're doing distance learning, and so it's pretty rough to find that long stretch of time. So I'm a lot less productive than I used to be, but definitely am still trying to do it.
And I've been doing, actually during COVID, I had just quite a buildup, because I also do a lot of textile art. I make handmade dolls, and I do a tremendous amount of hand quilting. So I was able to clear out a lot of that. And there is something extremely quieting and meditative about working with the hands, as opposed to the writing at that time. So yeah, and that was early spring, as Charlie said.
Yeah, I found it pretty tough. I still feel I mean, I guess it was just, at first it's, you have the family situations that you're trying to deal with, and then you're watching your city kind of unravel around you. Things that you love, you start worrying about. Yeah, it's very distracting. I did finish book 2 during the time, and now I'm in sort of a promotion period, so I'm actually trying to get my head back in. And yeah, it's really hard. I think the thing that's going to help is that I turned in my ballot today, and I mailed it off, and I was like, great, because you guys can just do whatever you're going to do, but I'm getting back to my desk. That was my whole. Oh my.
Thank you so much for sharing, guys. That's about time. So please stay tuned for our next session. It's HarperCollins' new native-focused imprint called Heart Drum. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Excellent role. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.